The Phoenix Suns have their man. Frank Vogel is the new head coach, and they're keeping the guy a lot of us thought would be the head coach. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, did the Suns win the NBA coaching cycle? Did they lose it somewhere in between? We'll talk about it on today's show. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Suns your first listen each and every day, especially to start your week this week where there will likely be a coaching introductory press conference, some offseason news. We're about 2 weeks from the draft. Lots and lots of stuff. So hit follow, hit subscribe. Get this show in your feed every single Monday through Friday. Become an everydayer. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com. Promo code LOCKEDON. Joined today by Brendon Dueñas, as I am every single Monday through Friday, every single Monday. And we're going to start with the Frank Vogel side of things. We'll talk about Kevin Young. We'll talk about how all of that affects Deandre Ayton, who I think is swirling around in a lot of Suns fans' minds in the aftermath of all of this coaching carousel stuff. But Brandon, Dwayne Rankin had this in the Arizona Republic, I think yesterday or sometime in his story about how the Suns got their guy, which included another reference to meeting people in Michigan where Gambo said it was in Phoenix. I don't know why that part is so hard to nail down of where these people all got together for these interviews, but even that doesn't seem to be concrete. Do you believe the report? I believe that somebody told Dwayne that. I'm not denying his work, but what I'm actually asking is was Frank Vogel their number one choice from the beginning, or was he not?
Well, look, I mean, first off, I haven't had a chance to talk about the Vogel thing at all. At first, it for me was a kind of a meh, and then the more I read into a little bit more of his background and just the whole Kevin Young situation, I've slowly kind of come around to the whole thing, and I think it's a win. Was it their first choice? No. Are they going to publicly come out and say, yeah, this is our second choice? No, they're not going to say that. Of course, no one says that. So I think Ty Lue was kind of the dream that was never realistic, that everyone kind of wanted because of the links to that kind of popped out early, but there's nothing substantial there. It was probably just a little bit of Ty Lue's camp using it as a negotiation tactic for the Clippers as well.
Yeah.
But first choice, no. Second choice, sure. I think it worked out though, with especially keeping Young on board. And like I said, we can dive into more of this as we get deeper in this episode. But the more I learn about Vogel's background and how he entered the NBA and, the things that he knows and focuses on, I think it's two areas that the Suns desperately need on the defensive side of the ball, and just bringing that toughness, defensive schemes. That's something that I've said this in the past when we kind of talked about it a little bit. It's just you have Devin Booker and Kevin Durant, you could figure it out offensively. At the end of the, you want the best offensive system for them, of course, but defensively, that's where they're going to win a championship. So overall, I'm pleased with Vogel. Not the number one choice, but a solid hire.
Don't disagree with any of that. I think you and I were on a little bit of a different page with the offense versus defense thing and the head coach. Yep. I know you were a little more optimistic about somebody like Nick Nurse, whereas I was a little skeptical. But yeah, I guess I would say I had it a little bit the same as you, where when I first saw it, I think I was just so surprised. And I did an episode, but I waited a bit and did some digging around before I hit record because I didn't want to come on and just... It's not an entertaining show for me to say, wow, 100 times. So I was like, let me just wrap my head around this and then try to at least get my bearings. And I think the idea of me wanting to lean offense with this hire colored how I saw it a little bit. But I do think that the league, you at least have to have a certain toughness and force defensively. And I think you have to have some schematic versatility, and I think Vogel has shown between all the places that he's coached, at least the good teams, that he has both of those. I think the toughness and physicality and force for sure. And then I think with what he was able to do with Anthony Davis and that Lakers team, I think he proved he can do, something a little bit more modern when it's not based around, Roy Hibbert, right? So like I've come around on that, and I think there's something to be said for being dominant on one side of the floor, for sure. And I know I was going to ask you like what thing excites you the most. I know you've been really big on the Suns playing faster, I think, or maybe I can't remember if you and I talked about that, but I know Suns fans in general have been pushing for that, and that's another thing Vogel's always keyed in on is like not only are we going to play aggressive defense, but we're going to try to use that to create points for ourselves on the other end and try to pick up the pace. So I think that's another thing that Suns fans will probably like to hear about him, even though he's not an offensive guy.
Yeah, I think the best case scenario was what happened in terms of keeping Kevin Young on board, because he knows the system. He's more of an innovative offensive mind, and I think giving him that that raise to become the highest paid assistant in the NBA, that shows he's probably going to have more responsibilities that come along with that. And I think Vogel had to be on board for that to go down. So I'm sure that was a part of that process. So bringing in Kevin Young, that he knows how to work with Devin Booker. He's been there with Durant for a little bit now. So just implementing those two. And if Vogel can kind of give him the reins of the offense in a sense and let him.
So your favorite thing about Vogel is that he's going to be the shadow fake coach that doesn't actually exist. That's you don't like anything about him.
No, my favorite part of this how this scenario played out, because with Vogel, I'll focus on him now. So that was kind of like the offensive side of things. But when it comes to defense and just the schematic attack that we know Vogel is known for and respected for around the league, he's starting as a scout, a video scout with the Celtics in the 90s and working his way up as an assistant coach and advanced scout, doing pretty much all the dirty work, kind of like Eric Spoelstra did for the Heat as he worked his way up in the league. So he's a huge X's and O's guy. Like a lot of people will kind of say he doesn't know anything about offense or he's not offensive minded, but this guy knows a lot of basketball. He knows he could still implement, it's probably not his style or what he's more focused on in terms of having this creative offense. And I think that's why I love Kevin Young coincided with him. So they can kind of use their strengths and play off each other's weaknesses in a sense and hopefully maximize both sides of the floor, because that's what it's all about. So just how this entire thing played out to me is really why I've grown on not only the hiring, he's a championship pedigree coach that has had a top 10 defense in most of his stints outside of Orlando teams that it doesn't matter who's the coach there, they're kind of screwed either way. So but overall, I just really think his the tactician defensively that he brings to the table is going to be awesome.
So to circle back a little bit on that, was he their first choice type of thing? I mean, I know that's not a huge deal because he's the coach anyway now, but one of the parts of this that I didn't really get to talk about as much as I would have liked in my first show on it that I'm curious what you think on is the idea of coaching, and this will lead us to Kevin Young, right? The idea of selecting a coach who is not your star player's first choice. Like you look at Milwaukee, and largely they went intentionally with the guy that Giannis wanted. Like I don't know if that front office and ownership group had its way if Adrian Griffin would have been the guy, but he was, because all the reporting indicates that he was Giannis's pick. So in this case, the Suns aren't doing that. Does that worry you at all? Do you feel like there's a potential for this to create friction, that those Booker at least had been, rumored to be a young guy? We don't really know how Kevin Durant feels, but does that give you pause at all? Does that worry you?
Not at all. And there's different reasons for it. One, if you just compare the Giannis situation, they're in Milwaukee, and it's a lot harder to keep stars in places like that. So they're teams like Portland, Milwaukee, those smaller market teams that pretty much have to throw all their chips in that star to keep them there. The Suns, as crazy as it sounds to say now, they're a destination team where I think people want to be, number one. Number two, Booker's been through the ringer here. I don't think hiring Frank Vogel is going to be the last straw for him, at this point. So I feel pretty confident that Booker's going to be content here. Obviously, he's a competitor, and I don't think the Suns organization or any franchise really, unless you're like LeBron James, should build your decision around a player. In their opinion, I think you should factor it in, and it should definitely be in the equation, but it's not the determining factor. So I think good on the Suns to make the hire they thought was best for them to win a championship. That's what it's about. It's not about what Booker wants. It's not about what Durant wants. It's about what's best for the team. And if that's what they thought was the best fit, then I'm on board with it.
Let's talk about the Kevin Young side of this. And I think there's a way to transition from one to the next. I have one last thing on Vogel that'll get us to Kevin Young. We'll talk about that next. First, today's show brought to you by Prize Picks. Every day through the rest of the NBA Finals, you can make a pick, make an entry at Prize Picks and get a chance to win $1 million. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected each day. Whoever placed that entry will then be given an additional 6-pick flex with the following payouts. If you get all 6 right, you get $1 million. 5 correct gets you $80,000, and 4 correct gets you $16,000. Full details can be found at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at that link to be eligible. Once you do, all you have to do is play the game like normal, and you could be the lucky winner. If you've not checked out Prize Picks before, download the app now or go to prizepicks.com, sign up, and use the deposit code or the promo code LOCKEDON, that's all one word, to get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100, meaning if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will match that up to $100 and double it for you. Don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Then enter a regular old entry before 8 a.m., opt in at prizepicks.com/million, and you could walk away with $1 million. So one of the things, Brandon, that I was going to say I liked about Vogel that goes with what you're talking about as far as experience goes, that's huge to me too. I mean, he came up with, him and Spoelstra became coaches around the same time. Then they obviously had those battles against one another in the Big Three Heat era. And that was talked about a lot at that time as an interesting pathway in that the video coordinator, younger guys could actually hold their own as head coaches. And I don't think they actually ended up creating a trend. We haven't really seen that elsewhere, but it's noteworthy that Vogel really cut his teeth doing that. But the other part of his track record or his sort of pathway to get here is he has seen a whole lot of different things. And I think that there's something to be said for the fact that he became a head coach around the same time as Monty Williams. Like, I think we don't really think of it that way, maybe because Monty was a player, maybe because he has like a little bit of an old-fashioned approach to things. We think of him as sort of this like sage, old wise coach, but it's like, no, they're kind of the same era and of the same generation, and Vogel has more head coaching experience than Monty Williams does, as crazy as that might sound. And on top of that, he replaced his mentor in Indiana. If people remember, Jim O'Brien got fired. Vogel replaced him. That was the guy that he met all the way like 10 years prior, almost 20 years ago now in Boston. And then Vogel came and had to take over for that guy and actually took the team obviously even further. Then, the Magic thing, he gets hired by a colleague, and then that guy gets fired, and then he gets fired afterward. Then he gets to the Lakers and obviously learns, I'm sure, a ton about how to deal with superstar coaches and all of the rest, or with superstar players and all the rest. And then when he obviously gets to the Russell Westbrook portion of his Lakers experience, then he's put into an even different situation, and now he gets to Phoenix with a lot of that background. And so I say all of that to say that Kevin Young and whatever happened with those guys, whatever led to Kevin Young deciding to stay in Phoenix and all that, I feel pretty optimistic that Frank Vogel at least is not going to have any sort of issue there. And I also would say that Kevin Young chose this. He chose to stay. So I guess I sort of say all of that to say that I tend to agree with you. I'm not worried about the star player side with Booker and Durant, and I'm also not really super worried about how this stuff will play out.
Yeah, and just getting back to what you said, just about the defensive toughness that he's known for in terms of the identity that he brings to the table. It's a lot of that too, like that Lakers squad he had that he was pretty much surrounded with LeBron and Anthony Davis with zero shooting by Pelinka in that past year that he got fired. And, a lot of people blame the lack of offensive creation on him when a lot of that's team construction. And same goes for defense. He's kind of inherited some more gritty teams, defensive-minded teams. So I think I don't like to put coaches in a box too often. A lot of the times sometimes it is like if a certain coach has an identity, you as a GM, you want to surround them with their strengths essentially. But I think you saw what he could do with that team that you mentioned earlier with Kuzma and Caruso and all those guys that, can help, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, players like that bring that toughness and defensive-minded approach, but can also space the floor. I think it fits exactly what you're looking to surround Booker and Durant with. So the creativity, I think, that James Jones can work with in terms of as long as you build a team that's competent around these two stars. And Vogels, he had LeBron James, Anthony Davis. He let them do what they wanted to do and let them thrive, and also built an infrastructure around them to maximize them. So I think it's the same situation, different players, obviously, but the same idea here. Just optimize your two stars and put them in a position to succeed. And that's the exciting part. Is now we're a few weeks away from free agency. The draft is a couple weeks away. Like, this is when the fun stuff starts, and we can start getting these outlandish rumors and names that will pop up.
So the two things that I feel like I can say for sure about Kevin Young that make me feel good about him is, one, Devin Booker has vouched for him publicly. There's reporting that he was vouching for him privately. Has a lot of respect for that guy. That matters, I think. But the other part is just, he's been a finalist elsewhere, right? Like, that matters.
Yep.
I don't know how much it matters. I don't know how much it really tells us. But those are the two things I feel like you can...
This will be his last year as an assistant. Sorry to cut you off. This will be his last year as an assistant.
Sure.
100%.
For sure. But so is it... I don't want to be like raining on anybody's parade, and I'm the one who's been talking up Kevin Young. And I think part of why I felt like he would have been a good head coach was the continuity and familiarity and creativity that I thought he could provide. And I think just having relationships with your star players matters. But I was definitely not sitting here trying to tell anybody that he was going to revolutionize the way that offense is played in the NBA. And I kind of feel like people have gotten a little carried away with, like, he's going to be the key to this and the key to that, and keeping him is just, it's like, well, he was the associate head coach last year and the offense wasn't creative enough. So what, you know what I mean? It's just sort of like, I'm relieved to see that all played out well. I'm happy that both Vogel and him are humble enough to just say, hey, the best version of this is going to be both of us coming and trying to win a championship together. Kudos to them for working that out. Kudos to James Jones and Matt Ishbia for getting it all done. Not saying negative words about anybody involved, but it's just sort of funny that it's like, this dude's been here and this team underperformed. Now all of a sudden everybody's like, pumping him up to be the best thing, including me. But exactly. I'm also like, I feel like I had limits to how far I was going to go, and I look online and Suns fans are just going crazy with it.
Yeah, and I think that did factor into Ishbia's decision, honestly. It's not so much that Kevin Young wasn't considered a home run. It's just more of like, it's a tough sell for your fans, really, to say, for the reason you just mentioned, is like, okay, he was here last year. This team's and the year before, 2 years are, had very disappointing finishes. So what's really going to change? So that's why I think I tweeted this out too. Like, the second Monty was hired by Detroit, I was like, all right, highest paid coach in NBA history. I just can't see Matt Ishbia sitting there and bringing an assistant in and trying to sell that to the franchise. So it's... By
the way, speaking of Detroit, Kevin Young picking between staying here and going there is probably one of the easier things that any coach is going to have to decide on this summer. Like, when I saw that was like what it came down to, I mean, I think if Kevin Young had really, poked around, he could have probably gotten another offer somewhere. But yeah, I think I'd rather say, hey, I might win a championship and I have a high profile and everybody's going to know my name now and I'm going to be making a lot of money and winning and staying in Phoenix where I'm comfortable and like whatever, rather than going to Detroit and coaching like, Jaden Ivey in year 2.
Yeah, look, the Kevin Young campaign was at an all-time high. His PR agents and his staff, whoever's in charge of whoever ran that train did a great job. Because Bill Simmons going on, like all these insiders that reporting that he was a favorite. Like I said, this will be his last year as an assistant, 100%. Yeah. So
I didn't even know he had a nickname, and now everybody's calling him KY like we've all had drinks with him before.
Guess so. He's at that level now. So we'll see. But yeah, overall, I think, it'll be good to have a little bit this is the last time I'll say this word this offseason, I promise, but the continuity in terms of he knows the system. And when you're like a completely brand new head coach entering a system that you haven't been around to see directly, it's good to have a little bit of that, not too much, because you want to bring your own look, but you also want to keep whatever's working going. So.
And yeah, my last thing on this is to circle back to the Vogel angle of it. And one of the things that Vogel's done too, that I would say makes me optimistic that this will work, is he kind of had to stomach this exact setup in LA. I believe Phil Handy, their player development guy, was not somebody that Vogel had a direct relationship with. I think that was a Lakers thing. Obviously, Handy had the relationship with Kobe. And Jason Kidd had a very similar thing where there was some rumor that maybe LeBron wanted Kidd as the head coach and Kidd was kind of ready for his next chance, but he took the Lakers job, basically became their number 2, and used that as an opportunity. If I can win here, if I can, learn some things, try to adapt my coaching style, take some time, then I'll get another job. And he did. Now he's a coach of the Mavericks again. And so I think it's kind of par for the course in coaching and a lot of sports these days for these types of setups to come along. There's just so much talent in basketball minds and sports minds these days. There's so much infrastructure all across the world for basketball that it's like the idea that there's only 30 people who are smart enough to make decisions on a team is just a little silly. So, but I like that Vogel's been one that's already done that. It's not going to be new for him either. So yeah, I think it feels like everybody's aligned. I guess I just hope, and to circle back to the question that I asked you about Booker, I'm not worried. I think it is usually the right thing for management to make its decisions and the players to feel however they want to feel. And I think it's up to the coach to make sure that all works. I guess I don't think it'll be Booker's going to ask out because of this or anything insane, but I just think you can't really afford for there to be any sort of friction. You can't afford for, it took 20 games, but now they're feeling each other out. But meanwhile, you went like 12-8. You really want this season to go well. So we'll see. But the other guy that I think is going to be affected maybe more than anybody else here is Deandre Ayton, both because of his uncertainty in general, but also that Vogel has had a lot of success with defensive big men. Does that change how the Suns approach Ayton's trade market? We'll talk about that next. First, another quick break. All right, closing out the show, from Roy Hibbert to Anthony Davis, Frank Vogel is, maybe you could say, known for getting the most out of defensive big men, developing schemes around dominant defensive big men. And you could even say, like I kind of did in the initial show I did on this, Brandon, that he's really revolutionized the league twice now with the way that he deploys defensive big men. I don't know if DeAndre Ayton's quite the generational talent that either one of those two guys were in their eras, but I do think that you could very easily make the case that, especially on the defensive end of the floor, somebody who's willing to be a little more creative and not just have Ayton drop into the paint every time he's playing defense in the pick and roll and everything else, that could in and of itself make Ayton a lot more valuable as a player, maybe make him worth keeping. What do you think?
Yeah, I've seen that discussion a lot just on Twitter, online, whatever. And I think there's definitely some merit to it in terms of his past and those Indiana teams, like you mentioned, battling the prime LeBron James Heat as well as they did when they had no business being in any of those series. Like, that speaks alone to just how great of a job he did with that team. But as far as Ayton goes, that, I think that works out the other way too. Let's say they trade Ayton for a Clint Capella or just some other type of big that is a little bit of a downgrade in a sense of talent, but fits the role that Vogel's looking for, then I think he can probably make it work. Like what he did with Dwight Howard with the Lakers too, and even JaVale McGee on that team, he kind of showed that it doesn't really matter which big I get, we're just going to make it work. So obviously it has to fit within a system to an extent, but I get the argument, honestly, as much as I'm kind of ready to move on from DeAndre at this point personally, but there's a world where I think Vogel, if he could get the most out of DeAndre, and it's going to happen this next season. If not, it's probably never going to happen at this point, at least defensively. So I think Vogel is probably the right guy if they do end up keeping DeAndre and there's no trade that makes sense. Kind of like we talked about in the past, like don't just trade him to trade him. And if that's what ends up happening, then I think Vogel's a great fit in terms of that. But also, like I said, on the flip side, there's a lot of bigs you can get for pretty cheap that if Vogel can to maximize their strengths and kind of play into whatever system he tries to build out here, then that's another direction they can go.
Yeah, I think the truth is, maybe the reality is a little bit between, it's obviously always going to be somewhere in the middle. I don't think I've seen a lot of NBA media people say already, like, word around the league is this was a little bit of a bet to see what they could get out of Ayton. It's like, I think people say stuff like that when they don't know what else to say. It's like sometimes coaches just get hired and you just got to wait and see. It doesn't have to mean something. But I also think, like you mentioned, Ayton or Howard and McGee, like if you look, and I did this back at one point related to JaVale, because obviously he was here for a time, and by the end of that Mav series, he was getting DNPs. If you look on both the Warriors teams, although that's less relevant because we're talking about Vogel, but as well as that Lakers championship run, JaVale was getting DNPs by the end of that series, and really Dwight was too in the finals. And so I do think a lot of that, what they were able to do defensively, was largely centered on, JaVale didn't play a minute in the finals, and Dwight played 71 across 6 games. So they really needed Anthony Davis to be special. I don't think Ayton is that, but I also think for sure, I think what Vogel coming does is that it makes me feel more confident saying that the Suns will retain some type of traditional center rotation. Like maybe there was a world where we got 20 minutes at a time of Kevin Durant at the 5 next postseason. I kind of don't think we get that with Vogel. Like you need some sort of size and center rotation that he can play, because I think he wants that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think going back to that point with the Lakers bigs is one of the things I liked about Vogel is he's not afraid to change matchup to matchup. So in the playoffs, there are series where he thought he could use the bigs. There are series where it's better to go with Davis and go a little bit smaller. So I think his ability to adjust series to series is something that we've seen as a little bit of a weakness of Monty's. I feel like sometimes he waits for the weakness to pop up and it costs him a game or two, and then he makes the adjustment, whereas Vogel seems a little more proactive in that sense. So that's one thing I liked when I was just looking through.
To emphasize what you're saying. So like that Lakers playoff run, just to use Anthony Davis as an example, AD was basically like blitzing and hedging to take away Damian Lillard pull-up threes. Then he was guarding Russell Westbrook and trapping when they used Westbrook as a screener. Then he was defending Nikola Jokic. Then he was defending Jimmy Butler. You know what I mean? And Ayton's not the type of guy to do that. But what I think can happen, I actually think somebody like Kevin Durant might really be more of the chess piece that Vogel gets excited about defensively. How can I really use the personnel that's here to exploit different stuff? And again, I would bet, like you were saying about how the roster changes, like they're going to emphasize, I think, size and defensive versatility with their role player, or somebody like Josh Okogie, right? Like I think those are the pieces that maybe on this roster, unless they pull off something really unexpected in free agency, I think you're really looking at those guys a little bit more. But like you're saying, the innovation and adjustment has been there from Vogel, and I think that's the part that people don't associate with him enough. And I think that's kind of the curse of LeBron James coach. Credit is always going to go to LeBron, right? It's like, LeBron got his 4th ring. It's like, well, their pathway to get there was kind of interesting, and the coach actually did have to do quite a bit. So Suns fans should be excited about that. That postseason run, if nothing else, showed Vogel can adjust. You're totally right. Yeah,
and the other thing with Vogel is just like we kind of hit on before is just the toughness. Like they're going to go after some dogs in free agency, and that excites me. That's the one thing. Like this team this season, I think was talented enough. If everything clicked and they were healthy, they could have won a championship. I still think that didn't work out, obviously, and I think one of the main reasons it didn't was they just weren't tough enough, and they got punked a little bit. They couldn't respond to punches. They need to be the ones throwing the punches, and it can't be Booker and Durant. Like those guys are competitive beasts, but they're also not supposed to be doing all the dirty work. which is kind of what ended up happening. And so you need guys like, let's reunite Caruso with Frank Vogel. Let's go out and get some real disruptors that are going to do that dirty work, maybe a trash talker or two to stir things up. Just build that defensive identity and be an intimidating team outside of Booker and Durant. I think that's going to be kind of the focus with Vogel. Is all of his teams in the past have kind of had that intimidating presence. And the Suns last year really, from a talent standpoint, did, but they didn't have that, that factor where it's like, oh no, we got to deal with the Suns. So that's kind of the mindset I'm looking at heading into this offseason. So James Jones has been around championships, and he's built teams, I think, that are right there. So now it's if him and Vogel kind of collaborate and get the right pieces around those two, should be a lot of fun.
I'll drop this here. It's not really relevant, and I tried to be respectful during this encounter that I had that I'm about to tell you in the audience about, so that's why I didn't, drop it earlier. But I did randomly happen to see James Jones the day this signing got announced at the Scottsdale Fashion Harkins, seeing a movie with his kids, which is part of why I didn't bother him about it. So I think I actually know from some carefully placed sources that are actually just my friend who lived in Cleveland that he's a big Marvel guy. My buddy who I do the Just Basketball show with ran into James Jones at a movie theater seeing some Marvel movie when he was still on the Cavs. And so I'm assuming it was Guardians of the Galaxy. That's just a guess. But maybe Spider-Man, you never know. Or Into the Spider-Verse. But he was with his kids and whatever. But I did say hi, and he obviously recognizes me and whatnot. So we kind of made eye contact. He said hello. I was like, congrats on the hire. And then we kind of said our words, and he made a couple jokes that I won't share because I don't want to be rude. But so that was funny. But I wonder, the reason I even bring that up at all is I wonder what phone calls may or may not have been made between some folks at Clutch, maybe LeBron himself, getting some intel about Vogel, because that is a connection that's obvious there between James Jones's network and obviously Vogel's past experiences. So I would imagine there's some nice confidence that Jones probably had that, like, hey, this guy's going to be what we need him to be,
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have to tell me what those jokes were off air, because now I'm curious. But I think Jones, that's the thing, is he's been around the league. So, and Vogel's a very well-respected coach in the league. So all the circles, whether it's Clutch or just, the scouting community, whatever, it's like these guys all have a tremendous amount of respect for Vogel. So I think Jones had to feel confident about it. I think Booker, circling back to what you said before, like, as much as it seemed like Young was his guy, the fact that they kept him, and I'm sure Booker was probably on board. But you're not going to hire a guy without getting at least a nod of approval, even if it's not his first choice. I'm sure Booker was on board, and Durant as well. So just at this point, like I said, the more I've dove into Vogel and the possibilities and realistically looked at what else is out there, it's like this is probably the best thing they could have done given the circumstances. And
imagine how different we would have felt if the Lou stuff never came out. That's another way
fair
to put it, right? It's like, if I'm not sure Ty Lue ever was going to leave the Clippers. So if you just say like Chris Haynes stuff about Lue and all that came out when the coaching cycle first began, if that was never reported, never in anybody's mind, and it was just, here's the 5, I might have put Vogel second. I don't know what I would have. I don't think I personally would have, but like, you could have convinced me of that. I think second, I still would have had Kevin Young first,
Doc Rivers, right?
Yes, right behind Doc Rivers. No, like, I definitely would rather have him than Rivers. Definitely, I think between him and Nurse, it's sort of a toss-up, and Nurse comes with a lot more baggage behind the scenes from everything that you hear and read and whatever. And then the other two guys, it's like, I don't really think they were ever going to hire Jordy Fernandez, because that would have been a big FU to Kevin Young. And then I obviously would have preferred Kevin Young. So that puts me at, okay, Vogel being second, sure. It's like, I thought Ty Lue was a possibility, but if that was just stupid of me, then like, okay, then you're telling me they got the guy that I thought was second best, and they got to keep the guy who was first best. So, how mad can you really be? But we should have a press conference this week, I would think, where Vogel can explain what he sees the future and his challenge and his opportunities as, and I'll have coverage of all of that, including more for agency and draft stuff as we get closer there. So hit follow, hit subscribe wherever you're finding this show. We are everywhere, including YouTube. We're free, and again, we are here daily. You can also read Brandon over at brightsideofthesun.com. He'll be back next Monday, and I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.